I didn't expect trouble that morning. I was running late, hurrying across the city, my thoughts tangled with deadlines and meetings. As I reached the crosswalk, a police cruiser pulled up sharply. The officer inside, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a square jaw, lowered his window. "Hey," he barked, his tone harsh. "What do you think you're doing?" I paused, surprised. "Just crossing the street, sir." He got out, slamming his door with unnecessary force. "Let me see your ID." My heart pounded, but I kept my hands steady as I reached for my wallet. People walked by, glancing over with curiosity and something close to pity. He snatched my ID from my hand, studying it with narrowed eyes. "You look nervous. Got something to hide?" "No, officer. I'm just trying to get to work." He sneered. "Yeah, sure. What kind of work would that be?" His gaze slid over my simple outfit, lingering a bit too long, as if deciding where I fit in his world. The humiliation burned as he waved my ID in the air, loud enough for others to hear. "People like you always seem to find trouble. Maybe you should think twice before wandering around this part of town." I swallowed hard, trying to keep my composure. I could feel the eyes on me, stranger's sympathy, mixed with silent judgment. But I said nothing, waiting for this ordeal to end, unaware that the tables were about to turn in a way the officer never imagined. He kept me standing there on the sidewalk, my ID still in his grip. A couple of people slowed down to watch, one even pulling out their phone. The officer didn't care, he was putting on a show. "So, what is it you do for work?" he repeated, his tone thick with skepticism. "I work in the city," I replied quietly, not offering more than I had to. There was no point, he'd already made up his mind about me. He chuckled, shaking his head. "Yeah, bet you do. You city types always think you're above the rules. Think you're better than everyone else." His words stung, but I kept my face calm. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing me upset. He stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough so only I could hear. "You ever been arrested before?" "No, officer. Never." He raised an eyebrow, smirking like he didn't believe me. "Funny, you look like the kind of person who'd have a record." I stared at the ground, jaw clenched, the humiliation sharp and cold. He had no idea who I was, or what I'd accomplished. But I wasn't about to tell him. Not yet. After what felt like an eternity, he finally shoved my ID back into my hands. "You can go. But don't let me catch you causing problems around here." I nodded, mumbling, "Thank you," and turned to leave, his laughter echoing after me. But as I walked away, I glanced over my shoulder and caught his smug grin. He had no idea he'd just made the biggest mistake of his week. I made it a block before I stopped, leaning against a brick wall to catch my breath. My phone buzzed, a calendar reminder. I straightened my jacket, brushed off the frustration, and headed toward the municipal building at the end of the street. Inside, the marble lobby was already bustling. Security greeted me by name. I nodded, moving past the front desk to the private elevators. The doors slid shut behind me, cutting off the city noise. As the elevator rose, I replayed the encounter in my head. I'd dealt with people like that officer before, quick to judge, quick to belittle. But today, he'd picked the wrong person. The doors opened to the top floor. My assistant, Carol, stood waiting with a folder in hand and a worried expression. "Are you all right, ma'am? You're never late." I managed a smile. "Got held up outside. Nothing I can't handle." She followed me down the hall to my corner office, the one with the city view and the title etched in gold on the door, Deputy Commissioner L. Anderson. I settled behind my desk just as the phone rang. Carol answered, then covered the receiver. "There's a Captain Reeves from Central Precinct on the line. He says it's urgent." I lifted an eyebrow, already guessing where this was headed. "Put him through." A moment later, a familiar voice, now careful and formal, echoed from the speaker. "Deputy Commissioner Anderson, I wanted to personally invite you to our precinct today. We didn't realize you'd be in the neighborhood." I smiled, a little grimly. "I was just out for a walk, Captain. I had an interesting run-in with one of your officers." There was a pause on the other end, a hesitation, as if he knew trouble was coming. "Would you be willing to come down this afternoon?" he asked. I glanced at my schedule, then said, "Tell Officer Mason I'll see him soon." The drive to Central Precinct was a short one. My city car pulled up to the main entrance, and as I stepped out, I noticed a few officers milling around outside. Their eyes widened as they recognized me. I nodded politely, my expression neutral, and made my way inside. The front desk officer snapped to attention when I approached. "Good morning, Deputy Commissioner. Captain Reeves is expecting you. He's in the conference room." I thanked him and made my way down the hallway, heels clicking against the tile. As I passed, officers glanced up from their desks, curiosity and whispers following in my wake. They didn't see the woman from the street anymore, they saw the authority that came with my title. Captain Reeves stood as I entered the conference room. He was a middle-aged man with sharp features and a worried look. "Thank you for coming, ma'am." I nodded, taking a seat at the head of the table. "I understand there's something you wanted to discuss, Captain." He cleared his throat, glancing nervously at the closed door. "Yes, ma'am. There was an incident this morning involving one of our officers. I believe you were directly involved." I leaned back, folding my hands on the table. "That's correct. I'd like to speak with Officer Mason myself." Captain Reeves hesitated. "Of course. I'll bring him in immediately." As he stepped out, I glanced around the room, calm but alert. Officer Mason had assumed I was just another face on the street, someone easy to intimidate and humiliate. Now, he was about to find out just how wrong he'd been. A few minutes later, the door opened. Officer Mason walked in, his posture rigid but his confidence clearly intact. He didn't recognize me at first, not without his uniform and badge to shield him. Captain Reeves gestured to the seat across from me. "Officer Mason, please sit. There's someone you should meet." Mason sat, looking from the captain to me, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. I fixed him with a steady gaze. "Officer Mason, do you remember me from this morning?" He blinked, realization dawning slowly, and then, unmistakably, the color drained from his face. For a long moment, Officer Mason didn't say a word. The confidence he'd worn on the sidewalk had vanished, replaced by unease. He fidgeted with his hat, eyes flickering nervously between me and Captain Reeves. I spoke calmly, my voice even. "This morning, you stopped me on the street. You demanded my ID, questioned me without cause, and made some interesting assumptions." Mason swallowed hard. I didn't realize who you were, ma'am." "That much is clear," I replied, not bothering to hide the edge in my tone. "But that's not the point. The way you treated me isn't acceptable, regardless of who I am." Captain Reeves shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am, I assure you, we hold our officers to the highest standards." I held up a hand, silencing him. My attention stayed fixed on Mason. "Do you remember what you said to me as I walked away?" He looked down, voice barely above a whisper. I said not to cause any problems." "And did I cause any problems, Officer Mason?" I asked, letting the silence stretch. He shook his head, eyes on the table. I let the moment linger, making sure it sank in. "Let this be a lesson, officer. The people you meet every day, on or off duty, deserve respect. You never know who's standing in front of you, or what they've accomplished. Assume less. Listen more." Captain Reeves nodded. "You're absolutely right, Deputy Commissioner. We'll be conducting a full review." I stood, smoothing my jacket, the weight of the room shifting as I did. See that you do. I expect a report on my desk by the end of the week. Mason finally looked up, regret clear on his face. I'm sorry, ma'am. Truly. I met his gaze, unwavering. I hope you remember this day, officer. Next time, treat everyone with the respect they deserve. No exceptions. I left the conference room in silence, my heels echoing down the hallway. As I passed through the precinct, the officers I'd seen earlier watched me go, their faces a mix of respect and discomfort. The message was clear: what happened this morning would not be forgotten. Back in my car, I sat for a moment, letting the tension of the day ebb away. I thought about Officer Mason, how quickly he'd made assumptions, how easily he tried to put me in my place. He'd been sure of himself, right up until the moment he realized who I was. But I didn't feel anger, not anymore. I felt resolve. Back at City Hall, my assistant Carol was waiting with an update. Captain Reeves just called. He said the review has already begun. Good, I said. Let's make sure they follow through. As the day wore on, emails and calls trickled in. News of the incident spread quietly, a reminder to those who needed it: authority comes with responsibility, and respect is not optional. That evening, as the sun set behind the city skyline, I looked out over the lights and reflected on the day. Sometimes, it took a hard lesson for people to change. Sometimes, you had to be the one to deliver it. I knew tomorrow would bring more challenges. But for now, I was content knowing I'd made a difference, reminding one officer, and maybe a few more, that you never truly know who you're talking to, and that dignity belongs to everyone. The next morning, the city felt different, lighter somehow, as if the air itself carried the memory of yesterday's lesson. In my office, a bouquet of white lilies awaited me on my desk, accompanied by a simple handwritten note: "Thank you for reminding us what leadership looks like." Captain Reeves, I set the note aside, but the gesture stayed with me. Throughout the day, I received messages from other city officials, even a few community leaders who had already heard whispers about the encounter. One, a longtime councilwoman, called to say, sometimes it takes being seen for who we really are to change the way things work. That afternoon, Captain Reeves sent the first draft of his report. The tone was serious, an honest account of what had happened and the immediate steps being taken to retrain the officers in respect, communication, and community engagement. I read it carefully, adding my comments and insisting on mandatory scenario-based training. But I didn't want the change to end there. I met with my team to discuss broader initiatives, workshops, outreach programs, and open forums that would allow everyday people to share their experiences directly with law enforcement. If one moment of humiliation could turn into a citywide lesson, I wanted to make sure it counted. By evening, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from Officer Mason himself. "I'm attending the new training. I want to do better. Thank you for the wake-up call." I looked out the window at the city lights, feeling something close to hope. Maybe, just maybe, the ripple from one morning's disrespect would help reshape the way people treated each other on every corner of this city. And as for me, I was more determined than ever, reminded that true authority isn't about rank or power. It's about making sure everyone, no matter who they are, is seen and treated with dignity. Weeks passed, and change began to show, slowly at first, but steadily, like sunlight melting frost. The precinct's mood shifted. Officers who once shrugged off complaints now took time to listen. At roll call, Captain Reeves brought in community speakers. Instead of lectures, they held real conversations, sometimes uncomfortable, always honest. I attended a few of these sessions, quietly sitting in the back. I watched Officer Mason, once arrogant, now attentive, as he listened to stories that mirrored what had happened to me. His posture had changed, less rigid, more open. I saw him nod in understanding, take notes, and, once, stand to apologize to a speaker for how he treated people in the past. Feedback from the public improved, too. People in the neighborhood noticed officers were less quick to judge, more willing to help. It didn't erase every problem, but it was a start. Real progress, I knew, was built one small step at a time. One afternoon, Mason approached me outside the precinct. He looked nervous, but determined. "Deputy Commissioner Anderson," he said, voice steady. "I wanted to thank you. I was wrong. You made me realize it's not just about following rules, it's about how we see people." I studied his face, saw the sincerity in his eyes. "Everyone deserves respect, Officer Mason. Never forget that." He nodded, and for the first time, I believed he wouldn't. As I walked away, I felt the weight of the past week settle into something lighter. The city still had a long way to go, but for the first time in a while, I felt real hope. Change was possible, not just for one officer, or one department, but for everyone willing to learn. And that, I thought, was the real power of being seen for who you truly are. Months later, the precinct's transformation was undeniable. New recruits now trained under a revised curriculum, one that emphasized empathy, awareness, and responsibility. Reports of negative encounters dropped noticeably, replaced by stories of officers building real connections, helping with community projects, mediating disputes, even attending local school events. I continued my work, but the memory of that morning stayed with me. It became more than a personal lesson, it was a story I shared at leadership conferences and public forums. I spoke not about titles or power, but about the moment someone's assumptions collided with reality, and how that collision, painful as it was, sparked true change. Officer Mason, too, became a different person. He was promoted to a training role, sharing his own experience as a warning and a lesson. He never sugarcoated his mistake, but he never made it again. One chilly morning, I found a small card slipped under my office door. It read simply, "Thank you for treating me like I could change. You helped me see people, not just uniforms." Mason and I stood by the window, watching the city wake up, grateful for the journey. The world wasn't perfect, mistakes would happen again, and sometimes old habits would try to return. But I had faith that, one person at a time, dignity and respect could reshape even the most rigid corners of our institutions. I'd been humiliated and underestimated, but I'd never let it define me. Instead, I used it as fuel to remind others that true strength lies in how we treat those who seem powerless. And as long as I held my post, and long after, I would make sure no one was ever dismissed for who they appeared to be. The chill from his words crawled across my skin, even though the night was warm. I did as I was told, careful and calm, stepping out onto the gravel shoulder. He gestured for me to stand by the trunk, far enough from the safety of my headlights to feel alone in the dark. Officer Miller walked a slow circle around me, boots crunching on the loose stones. He searched my face, maybe hoping I'd break under the pressure. He kept up the questions, each one sharper than the last. "Who were you with tonight? Anyone I'd know?" "No, just friends from work," I replied, voice steady. He seemed irritated by my calmness. "Mind if I search your car?" he asked, though his tone made it clear he didn't care if I minded or not. I hesitated, something every instinct told me was a bad idea, but before I could answer, he moved past me, yanking the passenger door open. He rifled through my glove box, checked under the seats, poked at my shopping bags in the back. Every movement was loud and deliberate, meant to send a message. "Everything here looks a little out of place for someone like you," he said, not bothering to explain what he meant. "You got anything in here you shouldn't?" "No, sir," I answered, my heart beating faster now. He took a step closer, lowering his voice, his posture aggressive. "You know, people get themselves in trouble all the time out here. Sometimes it's just a name that makes all the difference. What's yours again?" I told him my full name. He froze. For the first time, the bravado slipped from his face. His eyes darted to my license, then back at me, and I saw something flicker, recognition, maybe even fear. The silence between us was sudden and sharp. Officer Miller's confident mask cracked as he stared at the name on my license. The cockiness in his voice faded, replaced by a rigid, uncomfortable formality. He cleared his throat. You said your last name is Whitaker. I nodded, not missing the way his hand twitched nervously at his belt. He stepped back, suddenly unsure. Is there any relation to Chief Whitaker? The question came out forced, almost apologetic. A wave of realization swept over me. My uncle, Chief Marcus Whitaker, was well known across the state, not just for his rank but for his reputation for cleaning up corruption and holding officers accountable. The department's own internal affairs division answered to him. Even Miller, with his swagger, seemed to know that was not a man to cross. Yes, I said quietly. He's my uncle. The officer's face paled. He looked down, fidgeting with my registration, the bravado completely gone. I wasn't aware. Look, maybe we got off on the wrong foot. He handed back my license, trying to regain his composure. You're free to go. Sorry for the inconvenience. But I didn't move. I looked him in the eye, steady and clear, not about to let him off so easily. Are we done here, officer? He nodded quickly, stepping away. Yeah. You're good. Just, drive safe, okay? The night felt different now, heavy, but with the weight shifting. I got back in my car, the adrenaline still buzzing in my veins. As I drove away, I saw him in my rearview mirror, standing frozen on the side of the road, the reality of his actions catching up with him at last. I gripped the steering wheel tighter as I merged back onto the highway, headlights cutting through the thick darkness. My thoughts raced with everything that had just happened, how quickly respect could vanish, and how power could shift in an instant when someone realized who you really were. A few miles down the road, my phone buzzed in the center console. I pulled over at a well-lit gas station and checked it. There was already a message from my uncle. Is everything all right? Just got a call about a traffic stop on your route. Let me know. I exhaled, a shaky smile forming. Word travels fast in small towns, especially when you're a Whitaker. I texted him back, briefly explaining what happened without letting on just how shaken I really felt. Inside the gas station, I bought a bottle of water and took a minute to steady myself. The clerk behind the counter, a tired-looking guy in a faded uniform, glanced at me with a flicker of concern, but I just nodded and forced a small smile. Back in my car, I sat for a moment, letting the reality settle. I replayed Officer Miller's face when he realized who I was, how fear replaced arrogance in a split second. I wondered how many others had gone through worse, and how many times he'd crossed the line without consequence. But not this time. As I started the engine and pulled back onto the road, I made a silent promise: next time, I wouldn't just let it go. No one should have to rely on a last name to be treated with dignity. The night stretched ahead, quieter now, but with a new determination simmering inside me. The rest of the drive home was a blur: taillights, highway signs, the hum of my own thoughts. By the time I reached my driveway, the adrenaline had worn off, leaving a heaviness in my chest that felt more permanent. I sat in the parked car for a while, listening to the ticking of the cooling engine, replaying every detail. Miller's words. His hands on my things. The way his demeanor flipped the moment he recognized my last name. The unsettling realization that, for him, it wasn't about justice or safety, it was about control, and only the right connection could shift the balance. Inside, the house was dark and quiet. I dropped my bag by the door and slumped onto the couch, phone still in my hand. Another message from my uncle flashed on the screen: call me if you need anything. You did nothing wrong. His words were comforting, but they didn't erase what had happened. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table, a mug of coffee cooling in my hands. I thought about writing a formal complaint, about how many others wouldn't have that option, wouldn't have a name that stopped an officer cold. I picked up my phone and dialed my uncle. When he answered, his voice was calm but stern. He'd already heard Miller's version, and he wanted mine. I told him everything, start to finish. He listened, silent, then assured me he would handle it personally. After the call, I felt lighter, but also restless. It was clear that what happened to me wasn't just about me, it was about something bigger. Maybe it was time to speak out, to make sure no one else had to rely on luck, or family ties, just to get home safe. As sunlight crept through the window, I realized that one bad night wouldn't define me. But maybe, just maybe, it would change something for the better. Days passed, but the memory of that night didn't fade. It stuck with me at work, during conversations, even as I tried to distract myself with everyday routines. Every time I saw a patrol car in town, I wondered if it was Miller behind the wheel, if he'd learned anything, or if he'd just gotten better at hiding his behavior. A week later, my uncle called. His voice was more relaxed, but there was a seriousness beneath it. "We had a conversation with Officer Miller," he said. "He was strongly reminded about the standards of conduct expected on this department. He'll be on probation for a while. And we're reviewing dashcam footage to make sure everything's accounted for." I felt a mixture of relief and anger. Relief that someone was paying attention. Anger that it took a last name to get there. "How many others, Uncle Marcus?" I asked quietly. "How many people won't get that chance?" He paused, the silence heavy. "More than there should be. That's why we need people to speak up. I'm proud of you for coming forward." That night, I sat at my desk, staring at a blank document. I started to write, about what happened, about what it felt like, about how things should be different. Not just for me, but for anyone pulled over in the dark by someone who forgets what the badge is supposed to mean. It wasn't easy. Putting it into words made it real in a way I hadn't expected. But I finished it, and I sent it to the local newspaper, unsigned but honest. Maybe it wouldn't change everything. But maybe it would change something. And as I finally closed my laptop, I realized I'd found my voice, and maybe, just maybe, I'd helped make sure that silence wouldn't protect the wrong people anymore. The article ran a few days later, buried in the community section but impossible to ignore for anyone who'd lived through similar moments. Emails trickled in, some from strangers who recognized the feeling of being powerless, others from neighbors shocked that it could happen so close to home. One message stood out. It was from a woman named Marissa, who'd experienced almost the exact same thing with Officer Miller a month earlier. She'd been too shaken to file a complaint, worried she wouldn't be believed. My story gave her the courage to speak up. Soon, more stories surfaced. People started to realize they weren't alone, and that the right to dignity wasn't reserved for those with a powerful last name. The newspaper published a follow-up, and the town council called for an open forum to hear concerns about police conduct. At the forum, the room was packed, residents, officers, town officials. My uncle stood at the front, in full uniform, assuring everyone that accountability would be taken seriously. I saw Officer Miller in the back row, eyes down, no longer the picture of authority. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it simple. I didn't mention my family. I spoke about respect, about how everyone deserves to be heard, about what happens when people are brave enough to come forward. When I finished, the applause was quiet but genuine. Change wouldn't come overnight, I knew. But for the first time, the silence had been broken. As I walked out into the cool night, I felt the weight on my chest lift, just a little. I knew I'd never forget what happened, but now, neither would anyone else. Months passed, and the ripple effect from that night continued. The town council approved new policies, every officer would wear a body camera, and citizens would have a direct line to an independent oversight board. Training sessions on respect, de-escalation, and community engagement became mandatory. Officer Miller stayed on the force, but he changed. He kept his distance from me and others he once dismissed so easily. Word was, he was quieter on patrol, more cautious, and, according to some, humbled by the experience. Maybe he'd finally learned the lesson, or maybe he just realized that the days of unchecked power were over. As for me, life moved forward. I kept writing, sharing my voice, and helping others find theirs. Occasionally, someone would approach me at the grocery store, in the park, or after a community meeting, quietly thanking me for telling my story. Each time, it reminded me that speaking up had made a difference, not just for me, but for the town as a whole. My uncle retired the following spring, leaving behind a department changed for the better. He reminded me, before his last day, it's not the badge that matters. It's what you do with it, and what you do when someone abuses it. Looking back, I realized that what happened on that humid night was more than just a moment of fear. It became a catalyst for change, a reason for people to stand together, and proof that one voice, however small, could echo through an entire community. The road ahead wasn't perfect, but it was brighter, and this time, everyone was watching. The seasons changed, and with them, so did the town. The once quiet conversations about officer conduct became regular, open discussions. People who never thought their voices mattered now spoke up, confident that someone would listen. Even those who had been silent for years found the courage to come forward, knowing their experiences could help shape a safer, fairer community. One evening, the mayor invited me to speak at the dedication of a new community center, built with funds redirected from the department's surplus. The plaque by the door read, "For dignity, accountability, and every voice heard." Standing before the crowd, I felt the weight of the journey behind me. What began as a night filled with fear and injustice had led to real, lasting change. After the ceremony, I watched families and neighbors gather inside, laughing and sharing stories. The town felt different now, not perfect, but stronger, more united. People looked out for one another. They understood that authority was not above question, and that respect was something everyone deserved, no matter their name. On my way home, I drove past the spot where Officer Miller had stopped me months before. This time, there were no flashing lights, no shadow of fear, just the quiet confidence that things could, and did, get better. And as I pulled into my driveway, I realized something simple, but powerful. Sometimes, the biggest change starts with one small act of courage. And sometimes, all it takes to light up the darkness is a single, honest voice.